4 times World Cross Country champion and Olympic 5,000 metre champion, is challenged by the best of British. One of those runners, Gary Staines, who'll be taking on John Ngugi in a few minutes' time, has had a quick word before he went to the start with Paul Dickinson.
It's good to see you. The last time we saw you running was in the European Championships at Split, where, of course, you won the silver medal. What have you been doing since then?
Well, very little, actually. I've had a bit of a break and a couple of low-key races. Very low-key country race for my club, which I won. And then my first serious race was last weekend in Paris, a road race where I finished third.
So how do you see today? Is this part of a serious preparation for next year or what?
At the moment, I mean, everything is obviously geared towards next year, but today it's just to see how fit I am, and it's good that there's a very strong domestic field, just to see how fit I really am.
Well, assuming that you're going to be trying to peak for the World Championships next year, is it good for an athlete to try and test himself at this stage in the season?
I think it's peace of mind for like the athlete, you know, like myself. I mean, I obviously want to run well today, with very few races in Britain this year being televised. Obviously, I want to, you know, run as well as I can.
How do you think you're going to get on with the conditions today? We've seen Peter Elliott win his race, and really what was a very cold morning or afternoon, it seems to have got a little bit better.
Yes, it's very firm underfoot, and it is a fast course, so, yeah, I mean, it is a track runner's course.
And who are the runners to look out for apart from yourself?
Obviously the Kenyans, and Eamon Martin, and I think Mark Rowland as well.
What about Gary Staines? Is he going to be up there at the finish?
I hope so, yeah, I wouldn't be here otherwise.
Well, good luck, thanks very much.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I think Gary's right. Eamon Martin, Ian Hamer, Mark Rowland and John Ngugi, the World Cross Country champion. Peter, quickly before they start, have you got a favourite?
Well, I think you're definitely going to be looking at John Ngugi, but as Gary was just saying then, obviously when you're in a domestic field, then, you know, it's obviously you want to be the first Brit home, as Gary's sort of saying really that he wants to be up there, and there's people to look out for such as Eamon Martin and Mark Rowland, and it's very right, as what I said earlier, that this was really a track runner's course, and not what some of the other cross-country runners are used to.
Well, track runner's course, John Ngugi, the Olympic 5,000 metre champion, on the wide outside there, steered clear of all trouble and accelerating through in the purple and pink vest, immediately into the lead, and now immediately followed by Eamon Martin, who knows he's going to be competitive with John Ngugi. He can't let him get away. They all admire Ngugi, they all love this style, they all love the way he runs. They're all in awe of him when he's on the track in a 5,000 metre race, but more particularly when he's in a rough cross-country course. No one has greater admiration for John Ngugi than someone like Eamon Martin. Well, I'm delighted to see that Eamon's gone immediately alongside him. Peter?
Yeah, it's Ngugi's sort of straight to the front, as you say, and obviously, like, at least Eamon Martin's going with him. And as I say, like, there's been a problem in the past of people getting awe of other athletes, and it's best just to get in amongst them and let them know that you're actually there.
I can sense that you would probably like to be there yourself, Peter, and knowing you'd be up there and immediately alongside Ngugi. Just behind them, John Nuttall. Well, he's an interesting runner. He's at Iowa State University. He's been training particularly for the cross-country, and he was third in the American Cross-Country Championships a few weeks ago. And a lot of the aficionados have been saying that Nuttall will be the one to beat today. Well, I mean, he's got every chance. He's got the best British cross-country runners and distance runners here. And this is what they like. They like to get competitive against one another, and it's almost who's going to take the prime position. Eamon Martin, Andy Bristow, who was Britain's fastest 10,000 metre runner last year in that group too, and then Nat Muir, slightly less hair than he had a few years ago when he was a great track runner, but it's good to see him back in action. Well, Eamon Martin's having none of it from John Ngugi. Slipped through on the inside there, and Eamon's plans are to run the World Cross Country Championships later early next year in March, and this is a stepping stone on the road to that World Cross Country Championships. Peter, it's good to see all of Britain's distance runners out in one race. We don't often see this, do we?
No, we don't, but I think, you know, from when the past people always avoiding each other, I think sort of like over the last few years that people are coming out domestically and just taking each other on. It's not sort of, I was going to say, it's not that important, you know, domestically to sort of win today. Obviously, it's just, if you do beat as British runner, then it's obviously good for going into the winter, but everybody's aiming really towards the cross-country trial, the World Cross-Country Championships, or even the track next year. But you know, Eamon's sort of like getting up there and sort of like stretching them out now, and it's good to see that.
Well, it's a very confident start by Eamon Martin. The only race he's had since his track season in the summer was the Essex Cross Country Championships, but Andy Brister was much quicker up that hill, and John Nuttall too. Eamon didn't seem too happy on that incline. In fourth place there, Paul Davis Hale, who won the Chicago Marathon and is getting ready for the Tokyo Marathon in a few months' time. And you can see the quality there. Steve Binge has gone through the shot. Simon Muggleston. And right down the field there are quality athletes here. No higher quality than Britain's 10,000 metre gold medalist from the Commonwealth Games, Eamon Martin. Well, a few hours ago we saw Peter Elliott, the Commonwealth 1500 metre champion, win the 3,000 metres. I wonder if there's an omen there, the Commonwealth 10,000 metre winner winning the longer race.
And I mean, I went to sort of see him and win his sort of medal in the Commonwealth Games. But as we said earlier, it's very much a track race. And Ngugi's coming back up to the front again now. He's sort of dropped back. Gary's in a nice position there. As you said, the field is just laden with talent, with Steve Baines, Adrian Passy making a comeback this winter after he'd had so many injury problems over the past couple of years. And you know, it's just it's very, very good, very competitive at the moment.
Well, they're taking their time to get to that leading group, and there's about 8 of them in that leading group, and Gary Staines has just drifted into that group alongside Simon Muggleston, who recently won the 100th varsity match, cross country. John Nuttall from Preston Harris is in the States now. John Ngugi on the outside. Paul Taylor, who ran very well recently when he beat Steve Ovett in an indoor 3,000 metre race, and there's a good pointer there from Steve Ovett. And Mark Rowland at the back of the group, so a lot of the big boys are up there already, but there's plenty of time yet. Only one lap completed out of 6 1,500 metre laps for 8,000 metres. Eamon Martin in second place, and Ngugi, he's very inconsistent both in his style of running and in his competitiveness. Sometimes he is almost unbeatable. Other times, like today, the boys sense he's not quite at his very best, and they feel a victory over the World Cross Country champion would be one really to savour. And Simon Muggleston, who's gone into the lead, really feels that as well. Simon Muggleston promised a lot last season, and we all expected him to be in contention for the European Championships, but he feels he overtrained a little after his victory at Portsmouth against Ngugi. And, well, he's not frightened of him, but he really feels that today, and this cross-country in particular, could be the chance for Simon to re-establish himself. Eamon Martin looks deceptive, Peter. I often think he's struggling, but he's not. He seems to roll his shoulders, and you sometimes think he's in trouble, but then when the next blast is taken, Eamon doesn't seem to have a problem with it.
No, I think that's right. Everybody sort of thinks that with Eamon that he's struggling, but he's actually not. But Simon Muggleston looking very comfy there with Ngugi on his shoulder. But you know, there's other guys. Mark Rowland, obviously, he's very strong, and he's just sort of like in a nice back in a nice position, and he'll be coming through. I would imagine that sort of later on in the race. You say there's a long way to go yet, but these three sort of making a good impact on the race.
There's Paul Taylor leading the second group from Gary Staines, Mark Rowland. Both running well. The long-sleeved England vest worn by Gary Staines and Mark Rowland. Paul Taylor from Cumbria, who's really started off his career very well as a youngster and then had quiet a couple of years, but is beginning to come back. Wants to run indoors in the World Indoor Championships this year. And Mark Rowland, well, let's face it, that 3,000 metre steeplechase he ran in the European Championships was a marvellous run. Britain's best ever performance in the European steeplechase of all time. Paul Davis Hale right behind him, and John Sherburn running well in that group too. But Ngugi, as we were looking at the second group, Ngugi slipped 10 yards ahead of that group. He just seems to have that facility. This is what the runners admire him. He can be running with a group, and then all of a sudden, without any seemingly increase in effort, Ngugi can be 10, 15 yards ahead of the field. Do you agree with that, Peter?
I think it's not just Ngugi. I think it's sort of like what most of the Kenyans do. They go into a race, and then they sort of, as we were saying, like the British athletes are in awe of Ngugi, and the Kenyans are never in awe of anyone. They just go out there and run their own race, and if they want to lead, they'll lead. If they want to drop by, they'll drop by. And instead, they just don't become intimidated by anyone. And Ngugi just goes out there and runs his own race, and you know, now he's sort of stringing them out, and obviously he's making this sort of long run for home.
He's amazing, really. I mean, you can't take a form guide. He ran a race last week in France and he finished 9th, and he wasn't competitive at all. And then here he is today, just slipped into the lead on the first lap, then got himself buried in the bunch, and now has slipped back into the lead. Three laps of the 6-lap race. We're on to the 3rd lap now, and Eamon Martin's worked hard to close the gap on John Ngougie. John Nuttall in 3rd place, Simon Muggleston, Andy Bristow, Paul Davis-Hale, Mark Rowland, and then Steve Binns working his way through the field, and surprisingly, Gary Staines has gone right off that group and gone right back into the field. If you were in this race, Peter, where would you want to be at this position?
I think I'd want to be sort of where Eamon was, really, but going back, it's nice to see Paul Davis-Hale well up there, because so is Paul's training for marathons, so, you know, I would imagine his legs are quite tired from all the mileage he's been doing. But it is surprising to see Gary way back, but the field is very strung out now, and I say Eamon's in a right position to try and sort of go with Ngougie. You're not going to let him get too far, but say Paul working up the hill really well, Mark's hanging in there. Obviously, it's this corner as well. When we went round, that really sort of like takes it out a little bit because you lose your footing. But you know, it's still a good course and still very firm on the ground.
Well, I think Ngougie's settled down now to run a consistent pace, and Eamon is sensibly just staying a few yards back from him. John Nuttall in 3rd place, who, as we said earlier, the aficionados said he would be the man to beat, and he's looking good, he's looking strong. He's come from a winter of competitive cross-country racing in America, and he's here to prove to himself that he's going to make his name here, because, I mean, it's no good. They don't like it when they go to the States and run well there, because people in Britain disregard those results, and it's only the results that really happen back home that the real distance runners take any notice of, don't they?
Well, there is that. But also, I think, going back, like, obviously when British runners turn out and run, especially like in Britain, then there's a lot of pressure on them from the media. Whereas the Kenyans say, like, Ngougie ran badly last weekend, but, you know, nobody writes about that. And it's not the same like with the British athletes, because, you know, if we run badly, then it's headlines. So, again, they can just go out and do what they want when they want.
Well, it's John Ngougie, Eamon Martin, John Nuttall, Simon Muggleston, Paul Davis-Hale, and Mark Rowland's in that group too. So all the names that we expected to be there are there, but we didn't think they'd be as strung out as this. So obviously the pace that both Ngougie and Eamon Martin have set has been telling. Mark Hudspeth there, the Northeastern cross-country champion, running very well indeed. His coach, Jimmy Alder, will be absolutely delighted with that. I feel that Ngougie's just slowing a little, and I think Eamon's realised that, gathering his confidence. He'll be wondering how long John Nuttall can last alongside him, because he's never been competitive at this level in Britain before, on the track or on the country. And watching Ngougie up that hill, look at him, just extending that stride. He doesn't even seem to lean forward like the rest of them do. And he'll have pulled a few yards on Eamon Martin, because Eamon seems to be having problems up that hill.
It seems that Eamon, every time he comes to the hill, he has the problems. Just say that's where sort of Ngougie's sort of taking the advantage and sort of running away from them on the hills. But as I say, like, Eamon's still hanging in there, and those three have made the break from the rest of the pack. As I say, you know, really Eamon's got to get up there on Ngougie's shoulder and sort of like push him on those hills.
I think Eamon's got to start working hard now. They're coming on to the finish of the 3rd lap, almost halfway in this 8,000 metre cross-country race. Eamon Martin, head down, deep in concentration. He'll not only be worried about how far Ngougie's ahead, but he'll be slightly conscious of how close John Nuttall is to them, because none of them expected in their heart of hearts to have Nuttall this high up, except the people who know exactly what he's been doing in America. And the chasing group, Paul Davis-Hale, Andy Bristow, Mark Rowland, Nigel Adams running well there, and Paul Taylor. Three laps to go now. John Ngougie has that lead, which is not a winning lead, because we've seen him be in the front like this before and not quite win the races. Particularly, we saw him lead in the Commonwealth Games going into the last lap, and he was caught by Andrew Lloyd and Ian Hamer, who's in this race, who we haven't really seen figure very well. A little bit lower down the field, nice to see Steve Binns working his way through, and obviously his training with Steve Ovett up in Scotland is paying dividends for both of them. John Ngougie on the flat there, dives into that hill, accelerates into that hill, pulls a few more yards on Eamon Martin, but the race isn't over. He's looking over his shoulder, and I often feel when you're in the lead, Peter, and you look over the shoulder, that's often a sign of weakness.
It is unless you sort of like, you know, come up to the finish line. At least you know you got the race. But as you said, when you start looking over your shoulder, I think it is a sign of weakness. You're wondering where they are and how tired they're looking and that. And Nuttall's looking very comfy on Eamon's shoulder. But I think what they need to do is really sort of try and sort of close that gap and get onto Ngugi himself.
Well, if they could work together just to close that gap down, then the race is certainly by no means over, because Ngugi is not the fastest finisher, and we know that Eamon can finish strongly. But this is the crucial part of the race for Eamon Martin and John Nuttall. They just have to stay in contention with Ngugi, and he's certainly, apart from the hills, he certainly doesn't seem to be pulling very much further away. He looks good, though. He looks comfortable on this course. Doesn't seem to be bothering him up the hills, doesn't seem to be bothering him the slight muddy parts around those bends there. And that stride of his, that long stride, that raking stride. I mean, I said earlier, Peter, he's probably the greatest cross-country runner of all time. 4 times world cross-country champion. It would take a bit of difficulty to beat that record, wouldn't it?
It definitely would, yeah. He has run some incredible races in the past, and obviously he's showing his dominance here today. But there's a whole spring of hurricanes coming through, and I was talking to sort of my coach Kim McDonald. He'd seen Wilfred Carocci. He's training quite hard for the World Cross Country this year, so it just shows that there's not just Ngugi, there's the other canes coming through with him.
Just through the shot, Nigel Adams leading Simon Muggleston. And there's Steve Binns. Just ahead of him, number 22, Chris Robeson, running in the Scottish vest. I think Steve Binns will be working hard on the next 2 laps, and it'll be good to see him get back into international competition. The third group there, Paul Davis-Hale, Andy Bristow, and Mark Rowland. I think they're surprised at how big the gaps are. I think they all expected this race to be a lot closer until the last couple of laps, but they're working together now, and they're travelling. And up that hill, Andy Bristow looks strong on that hill. Paul Davis-Hale having a little bit of a problem there. And Mark Rowland just staying in contention, just doing enough. So he's in 6th place, Mark Rowland. 5th place, Andy Bristow. And Paul Davis-Hale, who is so consistent. Doesn't matter what event he runs. He can run the mile in 3:56, and he can run a marathon in 2:12. He just seems to be so versatile, yet he never seems to win the big ones.
No, that's true, as you say, apart from winning the Chicago Marathon. As I say, if Paul is training for the marathons, I believe he is, then obviously he's going to be tired, as we were saying with Stevie Binns. I was talking to Steve a bit earlier about, obviously, Stevie Binns is his training partner, and Steve's been doing 25-mile runs on Sundays and things like that, so he's obviously aiming for the marathon, and that tells on the legs, especially when the pace increases on a fast course like this.
Well, there's the first 6 in shot. John Ngugi, Eamon Martin, John Nuttall, Paul Davis-Hale, Andy Bristow, and Mark Rowland. And then there's a gap behind those 6. But still, Ngugi hasn't gone very much further. 2 laps to go, and he still hasn't increased that lead. And Eamon Martin will be getting confident now. 2,600 metres remaining. Eamon working very hard. John Nuttall on his shoulder, running comfortably and smoothly. And Paul Davis-Hale beginning the chase. Mark Rowland drifted off that group a little. Nigel Adams in 7th place, and Simon Muggleston in 8th place. And Stevie Binns leading the next group in 9th place. Well, has Ngugi got a big enough lead to sustain the finishing power of Eamon Martin? And is John Nuttall, is he just going to wait there? I'm surprised at that. He must know how fast Eamon Martin is at the finish, and he's just sat on Eamon's shoulder. It would be a great scalp for him if he could be first Briton in this race today. And this is why this race was so exciting, because everyone had shown little bits of form, but we didn't quite know how they would compare with one another. John Ngugi doesn't seem to be any faster up those hills, Peter.
No, it seems to be slowing a little bit. With John Nuttall sitting on Eamon, it makes you wonder whether he's just sort of settling for hoping to outpick Eamon and settling for 2nd position, or he ought to make that move now and think, right, I'll start to go after Ngugi and make a good race of it and sort of win on home ground, and as you say, get the scalp of Ngugi, which would give him a hell of a lot more confidence, because obviously he has been running well in the States. I'm not sure how long he's been over the Christmas period, because I was wondering earlier, talking to a few of the athletes, whether he'd still be suffering from a bit of jet lag, but obviously he's not. But it'd be nice to see him sort of start to make a move up onto Ngugi.
Andy Bristow in 4th place. He was Britain's fastest 10,000 metre runner last year. He ran 28 minutes and 4 seconds, and that was a good breakthrough for him. It was surprising that sort of time would be the fastest 10,000 metre time of the year, but that's what it was, and that was Andy's position, top of the rankings. Well, that's a good thing from the springboard and he's running well there today. Well, that gap isn't growing any, and I don't think Ngugi's looking any better now as the race has gone on. He's looking a little bit worse for wear, and Eamon Martin must realise, as they come towards the hill, onto the lower level, that there's just over a lap to go, and Eamon knows the power of his finish, and he knows that Ngugi is susceptible in the last couple of 100 metres.
Ngugi's not so light, flowing like he was earlier on, and on the hills he has been struggling a little bit to how he was taking them earlier. But it sort of looks like that Eamon and John Nuttall are sort of closing the gap, and as I say, there's still a lap to go. It's still a long way, and with a finish like what Eamon's got, then hopefully he's just waiting for that.
Watch John Ngugi into this hill and watch Eamon Martin. I mean, Eamon's closing on him on the flat, and when he gets into this hill, he digs in, and Ngugi just drifts up the hill, and Eamon works to get up that hill, but he is working. He is closing on Ngugi, if anything, and now Eamon can relax and just drift down the hill, around the flat part, alongside the river, and Ngugi's becoming more conscious that they're there behind. Andy Bristow and Paul Davis-Hale, both running excellent races. But look at Eamon. His wife's here today watching him. She must be sweating because he always looks as though he's struggling, but he obviously isn't. He's running very, very strongly.
It's very deceiving because, like Eamon's style, he does always look to be struggling, but John Nuttall still looks very comfortable sat there, and maybe he's just sort of waiting until he can see that Ngugi's probably coming back, and he's just waiting. As I say, there is a long way to go. They'll be hearing the bell coming up soon, and they're just sort of buying the time. But it's Paul Davis-Hale's closing on that bunch as well now.
Well, one lap to go, and then we're going to have a really competitive race here. John Ngugi's certainly done his running, and you can never predict about him, but I would think that Eamon Martin's confidence must be growing. He knows that Nuttall's on his shoulder. He knows that he can stay within 15 yards of John Ngugi over the last 400 metres or so. He's going to have a chance. But Paul Davis-Hale, his marathon strength is certainly playing here, and he's closing out on the group too. But Eamon Martin coming alongside Ngugi. Now, will he wait there, or will he go past him? Well, he's not in the mood for waiting today. He's gone straight past Ngugi. He must have sensed the more that Ngugi looked over his shoulder, the more chance he was dying. And Paul Davis-Hale closing very quickly behind Ngugi, and John Nuttall in the position he's been in all the time, on the shoulder of Eamon Martin. He must have decided that Eamon was the man to beat today. But I wonder how they're going to try and beat Eamon Martin. Eamon's working for this one today. He's running strongly, he's worked very hard, and Paul Davis-Hale moves into that leading group. Now, can the three Britons steer clear of John Ngugi? I think if Ngugi doesn't do anything on this last hill, I think his chances are over, Peter.
Still, as I say, there's still a long way to go. We've still got the short hill that Eamon seems to struggle up, and it's really like when you come through sort of like the 200 metres to go onto the home straight, that's where they're going to have to watch Eamon for the big kick finish. But as Paul has come through, he's timed it nicely, and he's up there, and he's sort of pushing them now, and Nuttall seems to be dropping a little bit, and so it's going to be quite a battle at the finish.
Well, they're all glancing anxiously over their shoulders. Eamon Martin, the Commonwealth 10,000 metre champion. Paul Davis-Hale, a 356 miler, and also the Chicago Marathon winner from 2 years ago. John Nuttall, based in America and third in the American Championships, and obviously the race of his life in Britain, this. John Ngugi, the world cross-country champion, in 4th place. But I think the race is going to be between Paul Davis-Hale and Eamon Martin. And Paul Davis-Hale can finish as well. I'm all right talking about Eamon Martin's kick finish, but Paul Davis-Hale's quite nippy in the last couple of 100 metres.
Oh, definitely, because as you say, it's ranged from like running sub 4 minutes for the mile to the marathon. So yeah, and they're coming to the downhill now, which is obviously an advantage, and I got the advantage in my race because if they attack that and get down, they can sort of like make the break from there. But it's going to be a good finish, definitely.
Well, Eamon Martin, he's not going to settle for his finish. He's going to try and get a few yards on Paul Davis-Hale before they head for the sharp finishing burst. And look at them working. They're really digging in there. They're both running strongly. They're both strong men. They've got 100-mile weeks in their legs. Paul Davis-Hale just trying to take the initiative, but Eamon won't let him. Now, this is the crucial point for Eamon. Round this corner, past the pavilion, and then the hill that he really doesn't like. But he's going to have to work at it this time, Peter.
So when you get to the top of the hill, you've got 400 metres to go to the finish, which is still a long way to start, sort of like putting the big kick in. And I think, obviously Paul's going to have to sort of do that if he's frightened of Eamon's big kick at the finish. But Paul got up the hill a lot more comfier than Eamon. And you see, they're sort of be coming into the home straight. But it's good, as I say, the way that Paul has sort of like bided his time and come through, and you know, and Googie's sort of trying to sort of close the gap again, but it looks like it's just between these two now.
Well, look at him, and he's working hard now, but when he smells the finish, they're coming around with about 250 metres to go, and Paul Davis-Hale knows if he's going to have a chance here, he's got to get rid of Eamon Martin before the last 100 metres, because Eamon's lethal in the last 100 metres, but Paul Davis-Hale, as I said, he's got a good finish too, and he kicks as he comes there. 200 metres to go, Paul Davis-Hale kicks, Eamon Martin moving up on the outside, and what a race we're going to have here between the two Englishmen. Look at Eamon Martin digging in. He came here to win this race. He set off on the first lap to win it, and he's now on the last lap out kicking Paul Davis-Hale. Looking over his shoulder, Eamon Martin finishes 1990 with a victory where he started with a gold medal in the Commonwealth Games. A glorious victory by Eamon Martin. In second place, Paul Davis-Hale, and then John Nuttall chasing up behind. An excellent run by John Nuttall, just ahead of the World Cross Country and Olympic champion John Ngougie. Andy Bristow in fifth place. Well, what a race that was, and what a brilliant and well-judged finish by Eamon Martin. Peter.
Yeah, it was a really great race for Eamon, and obviously he committed himself from the gun the whole race. He was up there with Ngougie at the start, and he sort of never slipped out of, like, you know, down to third position. And
that's Nigel Adams just finishing there, and then Simon Muggleston, Mark Rowland, and Steve Binns. Brian Rushworth, 3-time Northeastern Cross Country champion, just coming in there with a good finish from Brian. The locals will be happy with that one. But they're still buzzing about that race. John Ngougie looked as though he had it won at one point, and then we thought Paul Davis-Hale could get away. But here, the finishing drive that we've seen on the track from Eamon Martin. Paul Davis-Hale knew he had to get rid of Eamon by a few more yards than that. And there on the outside, Eamon Martin into that overdrive. He seems to labour at times when he's running steady, but then when he kicks, he widens that stride. He looks over his shoulder once. He knows in a few yards he's opened up 10 or 15 yards. And Paul Davis-Hale can't respond to that one. An excellent run by Paul Davis-Hale, but Eamon Martin smelt this was victory. And as I said, a great way and a happy way for Eamon to prove he's still Britain's #1 distance runner, cross-country, road or track. Paul Davis-Hale in second place. Well, that's the most exciting race we've seen here yet.
It's a shame that his coach Mel Batty wasn't able. He was at the Arsenal match today, so he's missed a good race, missed seeing his boy.
Yeah, they'll be making a lot of noise in the hospitality box at Arsenal today. Great run by Eamon Martin. In first place, Eamon Martin. In second place, Paul Davis-Hale. And in third place, John Nuttall, just ahead of John Ngougie, the world cross country and Olympic champion.
When you're ready. Eamon, congratulations. That was a great victory. Just take us through the first few laps, because there was a bit of chopping and changing going on.
Yes, it was a fast start. Johnny Ngougie made sure of that. I was quite pleased about it. I thought it would thin the field out, and I'd get in a good position and then see how the sort of race unrolls each lap. And that's pretty much how I did. It was very fast the first 2 laps. I think it steadied off. And I was working very hard. I was catching Ngougie. He seemed to be going away at will on the hills, and I was catching him up again, and that's how it went. I just felt as I battled and battled with my mind set on taking Ngougie. I had John Nuttall hard on the heels, and then I couldn't believe it on the last lap. I got to refocus my mind on Paul Davis-Hale, who came to the front.
What about John Nuttall? Because we haven't seen very much of him over in this country. Were you surprised to see him up there with you?
Maybe I was surprised, although I know he's capable of running like that. So, you know, I went in there with an open mind. I didn't really know who was the form person. I don't think there is anyone at this stage who's in particularly good form. I mean, people are sort of having their early races. So I just went in with an open mind. It didn't surprise me who was there. I thought Ngougie would run well. He's had a few races. He's not been running too well, but he gets a few races under his belt, and it really makes a difference to him. And today I think it showed that.
When did you first spot that John Ngougie was slowing down?
Well, I caught him a couple of times once he made breaks, and I just kept going. I tried to go at the same pace, tried to hold the gap, it didn't get any worse, and then I thought if I feel good I'd try and push on and maybe close the gap again, and I caught him with just about a lap to go, and once I caught him, it could have been easy to just run his shoulder, but I thought I'd just push past and keep on going, make sure that no one further down the field would close the gap, make it more of a sprint finish between a few of us.
And were you surprised to see Paul Davis-Hale up there with you with 1 lap to go, because Paul was some way back earlier on?
I wouldn't have been surprised if someone said you'd be finding out Paul Davis-Hale beforehand, but considering that we did get a slight gap, I was surprised, yeah, which probably shows that it may have been slightly easier to run it the way Paul did. But I wanted to take on and beat Ngougie today, and I mean, I did, but wouldn't have been very good if I'd beaten Ngugi and finished second, so I was happy with the result in the end anyway, wherever it was on the last lap.
Well, it was a great run. It's almost a year now since you won the Commonwealth title. Is this a good victory for you to lead on now to the World Championships?
Well, it's good to... I won all my races in January in this year, including the Commonwealth Games, and it's good to win my 2 races I had in December and finish a year like this. I'm very pleased. I had a sort of a dodgy period in the middle where, you know, a little bit of minor injury held me back, but, you know, overall it's been a good start to the year and a good finish to the year, so I'm happy to sort of finish 1990 on a winning note in such a good race.